Warning, warning, new block alert, new block alert.
Okay, I'm here. Let's do this. What's up, everybody, and welcome to this emergency episode of Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and we just got a heap of new information on Season of Discovery Phase 2. Blizzard has just posted a huge blog along with a 30-minute video that explains a ton of what we should look forward to in Season of Discovery Phase 2 and gives us a whole bunch of teases of the sort of things that we're going to see. So rather than wait until Thursday to talk about it, let's dig in. I have done significantly less preparation than I usually do for a Sounds Good Makes Sense episode, but we're just going to wing it and see what happens and talk our way through all of this information that we just got. And one of the first things that the blog talks about is the Gnomeregan raid dungeon. There are actually a few new pieces of information that we got about Gnomeregan. Some of the things it confirmed are things we were already expecting to see, like the fact that it'll be a 10-player raid instance. We were already pretty much expecting it to be 10-player. There had been some questions like floating around the community, like are they going to increase it up to 15 or even 20? But it seems like they're sticking with 10 players for Gnomeregan. They did also say that it'll be 6 bosses, which was what we were expecting based on the number of boss or boss-like creatures inside of Gnomeregan. But they did do a bunch of sort of chatting about, every time they mentioned this, they said, well, if you ignore the Dark Iron Ambassador, then there's only 5 bosses, and then they're adding a new boss. So I'm expecting what that means, and this is just a guess really, but it sounds like they are teeing off the idea that the 6th boss in the raid, or well, not necessarily the final boss, but one of the 6 bosses in the raid is not, in fact, the Dark Iron Ambassador. It sounds like he might not be there at all. It sounds like instead they're going to add something that's entirely new. Some completely new boss has been added to Gnomeregan. That's kind of what it sounds like. And they talked a bit about some of the stuff that we're going to see for the previous bosses as well, things that they've updated about them for bosses like the Electrocutioner, for example, is now on this like stadium thing over top of his pit with some other stuff going on. In fact, they even kind of made it sound like they may have moved him to a different pit entirely. So it does sound like we're going to get some pretty significant changes to the way that the dungeon flows, which is good. Gnomeregan was kind of a mess. Like a big part of why I've been excited for Gnomeregan is because this gives the Classic team the opportunity to do essentially what they did with Black Fathom Deeps, but level that up even further, go into Gnomeregan and fix it up and make it a place that people actually want to go and make it something that's actually fun to go through instead of the kind of, like I say, kind of a mess that it was before. They did also confirm, at least in the video, that it's going to be a 3-day lockout for Gnomeregan. However, they are doing something kind of interesting here. They've heard from a lot of people that they don't necessarily want to have to rush straight to max level within 3 days of Season of Discovery coming out so they can get in on that first lockout. They want a little bit more time to level. At the same time, they were hearing feedback, and I've seen a lot of this as well, from people who really enjoy that sort of like race to be first, the world first race, essentially, for Season of Discovery, who didn't want it to be like locked away for a while. They wanted to be able to rush to max level and have Gnomeregan immediately be something available for them to run. So what they've come up with here is actually super interesting, and I really like this idea. Essentially what they're doing is the first 2 lockouts of the raid will be a week-long lockout. So when it comes out on the 8th, there will not be another lockout or another reset until the 13th, and then not another one until the 20th. So those first 2 lockouts are 7 days long. This means that if you are in one of those groups that wants to immediately rush to level 40 and get into that dungeon right away and knock out that raid as soon as you possibly can, I mean, I'll be doing this. If you're someone like me who wants to get there as soon as possible and bust through that content as quickly as you possibly can, it will be available for you to complete on release of Season of Discovery Phase 2. But if you want to take a few days to get those 15 levels, and it is only 15 levels, I'm not expecting, especially if you've got BFD gear, I'm not expecting this leveling period to take a long time. But if you want to take a few days, take your time, level up and explore the world a bit, see how many new things you can find and so on, you've got about a week to do that before the first reset. And even if you take even longer than that, you're only missing out on 1 or 2 resets. Like unless it takes you longer than 2 weeks and 3 days, essentially, to level up to level 40, which is quite a long time. I expect even the most casual players will not have too much difficulty getting from level 25 to 40 in that time frame. You're only missing out on 1 or 2 resets. It's not that big of a deal. It is a loss, but it's not so substantial that you're now behind forever, because once you do hit max level, it's on that 3-day lockout again. So there's much more ability for you to repeatedly attend these raids. It's a very interesting idea that on paper, I really like. In the theory of it is very, very sound. We'll have to see how it works out actually in practice. It's definitely, this is the sort of thing that can sound amazing on paper and then completely not work at all once it actually goes live. There could be some other unforeseen issues or just something that I'm not thinking of because this blog has only been out for like a couple of hours that I'm just not thinking of here. But on paper, it sounds really interesting and really good. And I do like at least that they're trying it. Now, also, as we expected with Nomergon, they are bumping up a lot of the gear that's in there. They're giving a lot of like nods or redesigned versions of existing gear that's already existed. As someone who's maining Feral Druid through this phase and through the previous phase as well, I'm really excited about the automatic crowd pummeler. That's really exciting to me. And it's also interesting. I'm going to point this out here real quick. The automatic crowd pummeler does note that it gives attack power in cat, bear, and dire bear forms. Now, that wasn't a feature that was added on gear until TBC or maybe Wrath of the Lich King. It was much later on that was added. And there's only one other item accessible at the level 25 cap that has that on it, and that comes from the BFD raid. So it's interesting from a Feral Druid perspective that they're adding that to the automatic crowd pummeler. I had expected that they would, but it means that feral itemization is basically your weapon is going to come from the raid. There really isn't any other option. If you've got one of those weapons, like if there was no new weapon in Nomergon, the mace that I'm using right now from BFD would probably be best in slot until level 60. So just an interesting thing to look at. And it does seem like they're still including some of the like weird or one-off items that just kind of don't fit into most itemization sets in Nomergon at level 40. For example, they have a pair of leather gloves that they're showing off here that increases your fist weapons and your one-handed maces skill by 5. Now, that's probably only going to be a rogue item. Like theoretically, a warrior could make use out of it, like a single-minded fury sort of warrior could make use out of that. And so that'll probably be something that they look after if they happen to have a mace that they really want as well. But the itemization on it is just, it's a bit odd. There were similar items like that in Black Fathom Deeps. Like there's a pair of leather shoulders that just increases your damage against beasts. I'm kind of hoping that they pull back a little bit from those like, yeah, this item makes absolutely no sense and no one is ever going to equip this if they understand the video game sort of items. But some of these like weirder, just sort of bizarre items that are like, okay, there is a benefit here. What is that benefit and how does that relate to other things? I'm still okay with some of those, even if they're very niche. And generally fewer of those items would be good as well, just because it kind of sucks when you're going through your run and you end up disenchanting like half the loot off of the first few bosses because it was all just nonsense that no one's going to equip. It does look like they've also added in some like just for fun items. I'm hoping these are extra drops, like they're not part of the actual loot table for the boss. These are just extra things that can drop. There were a couple like those in BFD, so I would assume that that's what they're doing again. And they're also doing some interesting stuff with item sets. The first is, from some of what they said in the video and how they sort of presented things in the tooltips here, it does kind of sound like they're having some class-specific sets instead of something that's necessarily like, well, every single piece of this mail boots or every single leather helm has this exact set bonus that's tied to it. It does seem like it's more specific to the class that's wearing it. And that the reason I say that, they kind of alluded to it in the video, even though what they actually showed didn't show individual item sets. But the names of them are interesting along those lines. For example, the hyperconductive robe in the screenshot that they released, the hyperconductive robe shows that it has hyperconductive wizard's attire as the 3-piece set bonus. And that would be a little bit weird as a name for a set bonus if that was intended to be equipped by a priest. They also confirmed, and I'm very happy about this, that they will be using token drops. So there will actually be tokens that you can collect that you then take off to a vendor somewhere and you turn those in for the set piece that you're looking for. But there's two things that stuck out to me about how they're presenting these tokens here. One, the image that they've presented doesn't have class restrictions on it at all. It doesn't show that like a modern token back in the days when they were still used in World of Warcraft in retail, it would say like classes, paladin, priest, warlock, or whatever the set bonuses actually were or the set collections actually were at the time. It doesn't have any of that on there. It just says power depleted boots, soulbound, requires level 40. Okay, so this seems like a set piece that's probably usable by anyone, which means that when that drops, everyone in your 10-player raid who doesn't have boots yet is probably going to want to roll on that or going to want to acquire it through whatever loot distribution means that you're using. The second interesting thing that they've said about this is that the way they phrase it, they at least make it sound very strongly like these are in addition to the actual set pieces dropping by themselves. Specifically, what they said is to help players get access to additional pieces that they're having difficulty collecting, there will also be armor piece token drops, allowing any player to use them to pick up additional set pieces they may be missing. Now, that word also is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting in there to make it sound like what they're actually saying is this is an additional drop that can occur on top of the set pieces that you want actually dropping by themselves. Now, in the case where, like in the past, there's been specific classes for token drops, this would have probably been a little bit weird to have the actual item dropping in addition to the, like, you know, rogue, druid, whatever, like vanquisher, etc. set piece that was dropping in the past. But because these don't seem like that's what they are, they seem like they're usable by anyone. I expect that means that you'll be collecting these set pieces as they drop for your class, and those will be the more common drops. And then these depleted items will be less common, or at least harder to get a hold of because there's more people that want them. And the last thing that I want to talk about for items in Gnomeregan is just that they confirmed they're going to be a lot more epics. They said 3 times as many epics. And in the video, they even mentioned that they wouldn't only be on the last couple of bosses in the raid. So more epic items available, 3 times as many epic items available throughout the raid. That sounds pretty good to me. Moving on, they're actually adding some new reasons to go to 5-player dungeons as well. Not that there really needed to be much more reason to go and farm like Scarlet Monastery, Razorfen Crawl, etc. in the level 40 band, but they've added something new that I completely was not expecting at all. Essentially, they've added skill books, which just give you some sort of new benefit without having to use a rune slot. And I am very, very happy for this because of the nature of the sort of things that they're adding in as these skill books. Like, one of the points of feedback that I've seen a lot, in fact, 2 big points of feedback that I've seen a lot from paladins and rogues especially, were paladins saying that they wanted greater blessings and rogues saying that they wanted redirect or something similar. So greater blessings meaning that they cast them on the entire, like everyone of that class in the raid, and they last for 15 minutes instead of 5. And then redirect for rogues allows them to take their combo points from one target and move them to another target so that way they don't lose them when they're target swapping. And those have been one of the highest requested runes that I've seen from the community going into phase 2, or going through phase 1 at the very least, is people saying, man, I wish there was a rune to give me greater blessings. I wish there was a rune to give me redirect. And the thing that's always sort of taken me back from that is, why would you want to have to waste a rune slot on that? Like, for these basic level, just quality of life, make the game more playable stuff, I don't feel like that should be a rune. I feel like that should just be something that they add. I've been speaking in favor of, like, just give it to them, like just patch it in, like just add it, make it something that they just have. But adding these in as skill books is another very interesting idea that I don't mind. It gives you something else to go out and do while you are waiting for the next raid to start. It's just really important that these sort of quality of life fixes are not presented as runes, because then you have to give something else up for them. Like, you would have to sacrifice something by choosing redirect, for example, instead of whatever else would go in that rune slot. So I really like the idea of adding them as skill books. Again, it's the sort of thing that maybe it could have just been added directly in, but having them as skill books and something that you need to go and collect, it does fit in more to the theme of Season of Discovery. And speaking of runes, they gave us a few examples from each class of the sort of runes that we're likely to see. I'm not going to necessarily go into each individual one of them, but I do want to scroll through the list and just call a few of them out. So first off, Druid. Like I said earlier, I've been maining Druid for Season of Discovery thus far. Eclipse, I'm very excited about this implementation of Eclipse. To me, this is the good implementation of Eclipse. When they eventually converted this idea into like a balance bar, that got weird in Warlords of Draenor. I preferred this version of Eclipse. It's just a little bit more straightforward to wrap your head around as a caster. King of the Jungle, this one is very exciting. I've been maining Feral, and this is pretty much exactly this is the good version of Tiger's Fury. Right now in Classic, we have the bad version of Tiger's Fury. That's the good one. That's very exciting to see. Looking at the Paladin runes, I'm a bit meh on Sheath of Light. I know a lot of Paladins really want to be melee healers. I have never liked melee healing for a Paladin. It just has never felt good to me. And so I don't like the idea. Like the critical healing spells, giving an extra heal over time effect, that's cool. But the idea that you then need to go in and melee to increase your spell power so that you get more healing as a result of that, I'm not a huge fan of it. Now, granted, it is equal to 30% of your attack power, so depending on your gear, this may not end up actually being worth doing for a holy paladin. It may be something that this really only gives much of a benefit to like a retribution paladin who wants to do a little bit of off healing. And the other question is, what else can go in that slot? I should mention actually, this does confirm that it will be belt slot and boot slot are the two new rune slots for phase 2. So 2 new slots that we will be able to put runes on in this phase. And assumedly, there will be more than one rune option for those. So it does kind of come down to which rune options are you're giving up on to put that in place. Hunter runes, melee specialist. I know a lot of people like melee hunter. I've always been very meh on melee hunter. I don't think the game needs more melee classes. And having hunters become a melee class is just kind of... I know that in Classic, there were people that tried to make it work. I always felt like Hunter made more sense as a range class only. In fact, I didn't really like that Survival became a melee spec in Legion either. That said, if there's people out there that are interested in it, there you go. That's there. Trap Launcher, however, I'm very excited about. Trap Launcher is a ton of fun, and it's going to add a lot of ability to the class to be able to do things like drop a freezing trap mid-combat on an enemy that's running at you instead of having to use it ahead of time and make sure that it comes over and aggroes to you. So Trap Launcher is a good addition. I'm very excited for that to come in. Warriors, rogues, priests, all of these seem like good runes. None of them are massively exciting. Mind Spike is cool because obviously at level 40, priests can get shadow form. So I feel like we're going to see shadow priests start to make their big reveal in phase 2 once they can actually get shadow form and start doing some actual damage. Things like Shuriken Toss is like, it's nice. It gives some cleave to the rogue. Rallying Cry for the warrior gives them a raid cooldown that they can use. These are all nice runes, just not a lot to discuss on them. Warlocks have a couple of really interesting runes here. Invocation is a very interesting take on the dot clipping problem that they've been trying to solve in various ways for warlocks over the past basically entire life of the game. This essentially means that if there's less than 6 seconds remaining on your dot, then it will deal instant damage equal to 1 period of that spell's periodic damage. So you don't want to necessarily land it right at 6 seconds. It's not going to give the entire remaining dot damage of it, but it does allow you to cast that dot when it has 1 or 2 seconds left on it without worrying about losing that final tick. So that's an interesting solution to that problem. For mages, Missile Barrage is one that I'm just really happy to see because I've always thought Arcane was the most fun mage spec. So very interested to see how that works out. This Chronostatic Preservation one, I honestly have to say, I don't understand what this does. Like, it says it fuses arcane fire and frost magic to freeze chronomantic energy into a stored state for later use, which makes it sound like this has some interaction with other spells that you're casting, but I don't know what that means. And it also doesn't seem to matter how much of that gets stored because when you unleash it, it heals a friendly target for a set amount. So this isn't like, at the very least, it doesn't seem like it's a case of we're going to cast a few spells and that will power something up that I will then do another effect based on how much I power that up. I don't know, like, is this literally just a press this button and then 15 seconds or within 15 seconds, you can press it again to do something else? I don't know. I genuinely don't understand what this is trying to say. If someone in the comments has a better idea of what this is than I do, I would love to hear it because I don't get it. And finally, Shaman. So there's some really interesting stuff that they showed off here for Shaman. Maelstrom Weapon it's Maelstrom Weapon. If you remember Maelstrom Weapon, it's Maelstrom Weapon. There you go. But Spirit of the Alpha, this is really intriguing to me. This is essentially a buff that you can put on one target that increases the threat they generate by 45% for half an hour. You can only put it on one person, so it's going on the tank. Or, if you just really hate somebody in your group, I guess you could put this on them instead. But realistically, you should probably put this on the tank most of the time. Some of the time, it's okay to put it on, a particularly problematic hunter or something instead. Anyway, you can put this on the tank to increase their threat being generated by 45%. And we haven't really ever seen a spell, even in retail, to my knowledge, that just basically you cast it on someone and it just is a raw increase to their own threat generation. Obviously, we've seen things like Misdirect over the years, Tricks of the Trade, so on, that will allow you to transfer some threat to another target. We've seen lots of things that have allowed you to reduce your own threat, and in some cases even reduce somebody else's threat. But I cannot think of an example of a time where we've seen a buff that someone can put on someone else that just says, yeah, they generate more threat now. This just kind of seems like every pug's dream come true, where you cast this on the tank and now you just don't have to worry about them holding aggro or not. What's interesting about this is it seems like this might be the answer to Blessing of Salvation. They called it a lot the inverse of Blessing of Salvation. But instead of essentially giving Shaman Blessing of Salvation and giving them a buff they have to cast on everyone but the tank, they're casting this, or they're giving them a buff to cast on just the tank that has essentially the same effect. Now, obviously, they can only cast it on one tank, so if there's 2 tank encounters, that'll be a thing, but I don't know. It's interesting. Also makes me wonder, like, does this mean that Horde does not get Blessing of Salvation like they've done with other things where they gave them like Blessing of Might, Blessing of Wisdom allegories? Does Horde not get that? And in the inverse, does the Alliance not get a Spirit of the Alpha version? I don't know. This is just interesting to me. There's a lot to think about here. All right, moving on. Got some PvP stuff to get through. We're going to go through this one relatively quickly, mostly because there isn't just too much to talk about here. But we did get some details on the Stranglethorn Vale PvP event. They're calling it the Blood Moon. So essentially, this is something that occurs, and for 30 minutes when this event activates, it becomes a free-for-all PvP zone across all of Stranglethorn. It's an interesting idea because Stranglethorn Vale is one of the only places in the game that has a free-for-all PvP zone already in terms of the Stranglethorn Arena. And there is an arena event that occurs in there regardless. So the idea of expanding that to the entirety of Stranglethorn Vale, I get where that came from and I get where the inspiration came. But what's really interesting to me about this event is how much it differs from the Ashen Vale event. It's on a set timer. In fact, they're moving the Ashen Vale event to a set timer as well. This will activate every 3 hours and then be active for 30 minutes. So you will know exactly when the Blood Moon event is going to start. It also has no real objectives other than go kill other players. So for this 30 minutes, while it's a free-for-all PvP zone, you can kill other players and you can collect tokens from them in order to get rewards. You just kill other players. That gives you a currency that can be traded for various rewards, as according to the blog. They didn't say anything about whether or not you could loot that currency off of others. So I have a feeling that this is basically just a kill, get as many kills as you want. Just run around. If you die, it's whatever. Just keep getting kills, which I'm fine with. It adds a little bit less in terms of like needing to get out, and a little bit less stress to an event that's ultimately not even a max level thing anyway. That I'm fine with. They also said that it will, quote unquote, punish those in raid groups. I'm not sure what that means yet. I don't know if that means that if you're in a raid group at all when you're in this Blood Moon event, like something just happens to you, like you just die for being in a raid group, or if it means like you don't get the rewards for it or something. The currency doesn't drop or something like that. Not sure, but that is a good thing for them to have put in place so that there isn't the ability to have a massive raid group that just goes around murdering everybody in the zone. You can still have a 5-player group, and as someone maining a Feral Druid, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in stealth groups just pouncing on people. I'm just warning y'all right now. But it does mean at the very least that it's impossible to have that just mega death ball. You're going to have to actually be able to play a little bit. And if this whole thing sounds like an absolute nightmare to you, don't worry. They have added in the ability for you to opt out of the event entirely. You will have an NPC you can talk to that then means that instead of being free-for-all PvP when you go into the zone, you can still go around and do your normal stuff, and just the normal PvP rules for your server will apply. So if you're on a PvP server, you can still be attacked by the opposing faction, but your same faction won't be able to kill you. They also mentioned that you won't be able to earn any rewards from the event while this is active. What they didn't mention is if you will still give currency if someone from the if you are on a PvP server and someone from the opposing faction kills you. Doesn't mention if they'll be able to get currency or not, but at the very least, you'll be able to opt out of having your own friendly people be able to kill you, and thus will not be able to earn rewards from the event anyway. And as far as the rewards go, there's a couple interesting things going on here. One is the items that they're adding have this unique equipped Blood Moon 1 thing on them. So you're going to have to pick and choose one singular item from the Blood Moon to be able to wear. That's interesting. They're also adding 2 new mounts, which are actually new to Classic. And they went out of their way to point out that they are faction agnostic as well. So if you are an Alliance player that's always wanted to ride a Raptor, or if you are a Horde player that's always wanted an easier way to ride on a cat, you now have that ability. They're doing a lot more stuff with professions. They're leaning a lot more into adding new stuff for professions, which I'm very, very excited to see. The stuff that they added, the little bits that they added in phase 1 were cool. So it's exciting that they're adding more profession recipes in. Lots more soulbound stuff that you can create for yourself. They're adding some self-benefit things to enchanting and alchemy, which is interesting. The alchemy one sounds... I don't think the alchemy one sounds very good off the top of my head, but maybe somebody who's going to crunch the numbers on that makes it sound better. It essentially gives you a rejuvenation potion, which restores some health and mana, which I would assume is on the same cooldown as your health and mana, like a regular rejuvenation potion, but maybe not. But it also gives you a short term, a 15-second attack power and spell damage increase. Doesn't say anything about healing, but the mana is pretty good for healing, so who knows? If that is on a separate cooldown from a regular rejuvenation potion, that's really good. But if it's not, then I don't know, kind of iffy. They also announced that they are not going to include profession specializations in phase 2, which is interesting. Normally those did unlock by the time you were able to start doing some of this stuff. What they've said specifically is that they just don't think profession specializations outside of like engineering are all that interesting. There's not really a meaningful choice to a lot of it. It's just sort of like what pieces of armor do you want to be able to craft? And none of them were that important anyway, outside of like a couple ones for like Feral Druid and so on. Again, I'm being biased because I'm maining Feral in this phase. But they said that they will be adding a whole bunch of new stuff for profession specializations in phase 3. They just wanted more time to actually implement it and do something cool with it. And I'm down with that. I like the idea of saying, we're not going to put out this like meh version of it until we can actually spend some time and make some cool stuff for it later on. And also prevent people from maybe choosing a specialization that they then want to switch when that cool stuff comes in phase 3. So I like this. It's a little bit interesting because some of those items are actually pretty important. Like I mentioned, for Feral Druid, there's a Wolf's Head Helm, which is a pretty important item for Feral Druids in Classic. That will have some ramifications, but we'll see how it ends up working out in the long term. And then at the bottom of the blog, there's these 2 little footnotes, just like little casual things to throw in at the end. One is that there's going to be an XP buff. We kind of knew that was coming already anyway, but there's going to be an XP buff by 50% going from 1 to 25. So that's cool for anyone who wants to catch up. And then also this casual little side mention of how they're banning GDKP runs from Season of Discovery. Just slip that in right at the end. But this is super interesting and completely not something that I expected them to do. Essentially, if you're unfamiliar, a GDKP run or a gold run essentially is where when an item drops in a raid, everyone in the raid bids some amount of coin on it, and they say, okay, I'll give 100, I'll give 1 gold for it, I'll give 2 gold for it, I'll give 5 gold for it, etc. That gold is then collected by usually raid leader, and then at the end of the run, like whoever bids the most gold, they win the item. At the end of the run, the gold that was acquired gets split out equally to everyone who attended. And a lot of people have genuinely enjoyed this approach because it means that when they go to a run, even if they don't get any drops from the run that they wanted, they at least gained some gold from the other people who did get some drops. So it was worth their time regardless. And there's a lot of people who really hate GDKP runs. And there's several reasons for this. Some of them make sense. Some of them kind of don't. Like, there are people who say, well, the GDKP runs just means that I have to farm gold like crazy to ever get any drops. Like, okay, just don't go to those runs. Like, if you don't want to, just don't go to them. But there are some valid reasons why people don't like them. One is it's seen as a major vector for people then wanting to buy gold, which in turn increases the value of botting for gold sellers. So if GDKP runs exist, then that there's a market for people to use illegal transactions to purchase gold in the game, or illegal is the wrong word, but against the rules transactions to purchase gold from a gold seller, which then relates to them having more of a market to sell gold, which then means that you see more bots in the game. But another major point that's been brought up, and one that Blizzard alluded to directly in this blog post as well, is the idea that the social implications that GDKP runs existing end up having specifically on guild organization. After all, if GDKP runs are common on your server and you want to form a guild and have a constant group of people that are going to the same run every week, it is significantly more difficult to get people to join your guild if you're not paying out gold for drops that don't occur. To put that a lot more directly, if I'm just some rando and you're trying to recruit me into your guild, what is the incentive for me to join your raid group and go to your raid when I could join a GDKP run instead, and at the very least know that if I don't get any loot, at least I got some gold as a result? Now, me, myself, I've never participated in GDKP runs because I would rather have, like, I just would rather have a group of people that I go with regularly. I very rarely pug raids even at all, let alone for gold. I'm also not someone who wants to go out and farm a whole bunch of gold so that I can be able to afford drops. And yes, I know that you can get the gold from going to the GDKP runs. I'm too lazy for that. I'm not going to go to a bunch of those hoping that eventually the amount of gold I've gotten from them is enough for me to be able to buy a piece of gear. I'd rather have everyone rewarded for the amount of time they've spent in the raid as opposed to what they've been doing outside of the raid to earn extra gold. But ultimately, like, I don't actually really have a strong opinion either way on GDKP runs. Like I said, I just don't go to them. It's just something that I've not engaged with. And we haven't really had a problem with our community guild, largely because, I don't know, it's a community guild. There's lots of people. We haven't really had a problem filling BFD raids, so it just hasn't been a problem for me. That said, I do know that it has been a problem for some people, so I don't know. It's interesting to me at the very least. I am sure we will be examining this a little bit more in the future. By the way, quick aside before I forget on the GDKP topic, I've seen a few people already saying, well, there's no possible way that they can enforce this. It's actually pretty easy. All you got to, like, these are pickup groups, right? All you really got to do is look to see who's collecting an item and then trading gold. And if it's like, whether or not it's a matter of like right then or it happens later or whatever, they're not going to want to go too much later before they collect that gold. And you can see who's running these. Like, just following the trail of gold will give them all the information that they need to know whether or not somebody's actually doing a GDKP run or not. You don't ever need anybody to say anything in game. Literally, the trading of gold will be enough for them to keep up on it. So it's completely enforceable. It's just interesting what the rules around it are going to be. And they did say that they will have more information about that in the future. So again, I assume we're going to be coming back to this topic at some point. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I hope that this came across as clearly as it could. It's 11:30 p.m. for me right now. So, and I still got to edit this and put everything together. So it's entirely possible that some of my words were not exactly words throughout all that, but hopefully it still comes across well. Thanks again so much for watching. Now, because I'm releasing this one on Tuesday, I'm not going to also cram one together to release on Thursday. So this is the Sounds Good Makes Sense episode for this week. However, keep an eye on this channel anyway, because I do have a couple other videos that I may end up producing and putting out this week. Plus, the first episode of Transmog Throwdown will be coming out very soon. As always, you can find me on pretty much every social media. I'm mostly active on Twitter and Blue Sky these days, as well as Discord. You can find me pretty much everywhere under the name Devilore. I'm pretty much standardized that everywhere, so keep an eye out for that. Check out my Twitch streams, check out my YouTube live streams. I've been dual streaming over here on YouTube as well. And just generally keep an eye out. There's a lot of stuff I've got cooking and a lot of things that I want to do. And I'll have some new announcements for stuff coming up in February real soon as well. So keep an eye out. And of course, huge shout out to everyone who has signed up on Patreon. I really, really appreciate all the support. If you haven't signed up yet or just want to give it a look, the link is right down below. That is patreon.com/Devilore. Please do give that a look, because every little bit of support, now that I'm doing this full time again, every little bit of support helps tremendously. Anyway, I need to start editing this so I can get this out. It is late and I am actually very hungry, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much once again. I'll see you next week.